The world economy has been described as limping along. The IMF expects global growth next year to be around 3% despite inflation and concerns about Ukraine. The countries of Latin America, with some exceptions, grew more than predicted this year. Joel Richards has this.
Global inflation eased in 2023 with notable exceptions in Latin America. According to the IMF, Venezuela had the highest inflation rate in the world, and this year Argentina veered towards hyperinflation. Latin America's third largest economy is suffering its worst economic crisis in decades. Annual inflation reached 100% in March and continued to accelerate over the course of the year. The country's economic troubles were on the minds of Argentinian voters who supported the outsider in presidential elections last month. Libertarian Javier Milei campaigned on the promise of radical reform. In his first week in office, the new government devalued the peso by 54%. Trade bloc Mercosur, comprising Argentina as well as Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay and new full-time member Bolivia, ended the year without finalising its much-vaunted trade deal with the European Union. The largest economy in the region, Brazil, posted growth. The powerful agricultural sector boosted exports, increasing economic activity. Unemployment is at its lowest since 2015. In Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador unveiled his marquee project, the Tren Maya. The railway has brought major environmental concerns, but it is part of a push for the country's tourism sector, which rebounded this year. Mexico's unemployment rate is also low, and there are high expectations for the economy with nearshoring, the locating of manufacturing closer to the United States in the coming years.
Well, it's interesting that in South America, with the exception of Argentina probably and Venezuela to a large extent, we have a lot more economic stability than political stability.
Since 2019, only 2 out of 18 presidential elections in the region have seen the incumbent keep power. 2024 brings fresh economic challenges and a busy election calendar with 5 countries, including Mexico and Venezuela, going to the polls. Joel Richards, CGTN, Buenos Aires.
For more on Latin America's economy and its performance, I spoke to Gilson Schwartz, economics professor at the University of Sao Paulo. He begins on this year's economic performance.
Basically, we again in Latin America reached some bottlenecks, structural bottlenecks. So the economy, the Brazilian economy, even the Argentinian economy, most of the Latin American economies are kind of used to crisis, to difficulties, to challenges, to ups and downs in its economic cycles. But in a sense, I think that over the years, especially after the debt crisis, Latin American countries adapted very well to short-term issues. However, long-term challenges remain almost untouched. And the key element here, the key factor is investment. Just today, the OECD published a report, their annual report for Latin America, and it's really disappointing in the sense that there is a gap, a serious gap between high levels of inequality and low rates of growth. So it's a structural long-term challenges. How are you going to move into digital transformations and more strategic investments that can actually expand our perspectives in terms of economic development if you have that kind of gap between the social structure and the low level of growth rate? So this is not going to be like an Asian tiger, definitely. Many people hope that.
I mean, one of the examples of a country facing the challenges you're highlighting, I think you'd overlay that with the currency issue as well, was Argentina. They've got a new leader. Some are optimistic that the new leader can make the reforms necessary to change the course of the country. Others are very skeptical. I'm curious your viewpoint.
There was a lot of brouhaha during the campaign with respect to the extinction of the central bank, or elimination of even social policies and things like that. But I think that was part of the political campaign. What we have now, pragmatically speaking, is a very well-known receipt that is administered, or let me say, mentored by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. So it's budget cuts, free exchange rate, liberalization of the economy, and of course, social costs, social expenditure costs. So in that sense, our experience with the IMF orthodox adjustment models is not really good over the decades. I mean, the IMF itself has reviewed its position, but in this case, it's very orthodox. Nothing really disruptive. I mean, the exchange evaluation was very high, but basically it brought the official exchange rate to the level of the market.
Some say that the dollarization for Argentina essentially increases the risk, if not almost assures that they will eventually default in the medium and long run.
Well, the problem here is that with inflation, of course, the real power of real purchasing power, the real value of wages will go down. That, complemented by the absence of social policies, means that we are actually deepening the gap between social access to consumption and growth level. So how can an economy like the Argentine economy, with a history of middle class participation and consumption, how can it achieve higher levels of growth, cutting public expenditures, cutting social expenditures, and then aiming for, a free economy that will bring the employment generation, will bring it to higher levels? There's only one answer, and that's the agro-industrial sector. So Argentina, despite all this, again, let's say, formulation in terms of orthodox policies, as a matter of fact, what the Argentine economy is going through, has been going over the years, is a deindustrialization process. And then the agro-export, the agro-business, the agro-industrial sectors, they champion economic growth. Is very much like what's going on in Brazil. And it's, again, a very important issue to
yeah, let's talk about Brazil, because these issues are facing a lot of different economies in Latin America. Brazil and its neighbors have been dealing with inflation for some time. They're struggling with perhaps international investment. The exports are still relatively healthy, so a lot of investors who may not be familiar with that region of the world may scratch their heads and wonder why aren't they doing better?
Well, the key element again is investment. If you compare the investments, the weight of investment over GDP, Brazil and Latin America, the region as a whole, is at about the same level as sub-Saharan Africa. We are below Middle East. We are at about an average 20% of GDP in terms of investment. Developed countries are about 25%, and Asian economies reach up to 40% of investment with relation to GDP. So how to recover investment in manufacturers, in new sectors, new strategic sectors, like those that can be even, job generation, employment generation sectors, like the environmental transition, or new public policies, new cultural policies, and of course, the digital transformation. This is what OECD advises to do. So a short-term stabilization package may avoid hyperinflation, but it does not generate growth except for the agricultural exports.
It's perplexing, Gilson, because they have the right demographics, they have the right entrepreneurial spirit that you'd want in any emerging market, and arguably it's already emerged. And one has to wonder, why hasn't there been more investment?
It's really perplexing, because these governments on the left, on the right, at different moments in different countries, they all pray at the altar of no state. The private investment will be recovered by itself, and even more, they believe that cutting public investment will stimulate private investment. Well, as a matter of fact, that's not what's going on in Asia or in the European Union or even in the United States. So it's really perplexing.